Hello, welcome to Washington Talk. I'm Ji Ha-ham. North Korea's Kim Jong-un in his key political meeting declared the two Koreas as two hostile countries in a state of war and ordered preparations for the great event of putting the entire territory of South Korea under their control. While North Korea made the highest level military threat, President Yoon Suk-yeol pledged to fundamentally block North Korea's nuclear and missile threats by completing a strengthened U.S.-South Korea extended deterrence system. In the midst of North Korea's increasing threat and the signs of strengthened solidarity between North Korea, China, and Russia, the world awaits the next moves of the U.S., South Korea, and Japan. Today, we'll discuss these and more.
북한의 핵미사일 위협에 대비해 한국형 삼축 체계를 더욱 강력히 구축하는 데 속도를 낼 것입니다.
Joining me is Mr. Sidney Seiler, Senior Advisor at the Center for Strategic and International Studies. Mr. Seiler was former National Intelligence Officer for North Korea on the National Intelligence Council until July of last year. Mr. Seiler was the Special Envoy for Six-Party Talks and National Security Council Korea Director during the Obama administration. Mr. Seiler also served as Senior Analyst for U.S. Force Korea. Mr. Seiler has worked on North Korea issues for over 40 years. Mr. Bruce Klingner is also with us today. Mr. Klingner is a Senior Research Fellow at the Heritage Foundation. Mr. Klingner spent 20 years at the Central Intelligence Agency and the Defense Intelligence Agency and served as CIA's Deputy Division Chief for Korea. Welcome to the show. Good to have you both today.
Oh, good to be here.
Good morning.
Okay, Mr. Seiler, Kim Jong-un's message at the Workers' Party Central Committee meeting, in which he vowed to dominate the entire territory of South Korea, is the most serious threat from the North Korean leader since he came to power. What do you think this message means? Is it a sign that the North is preparing for further provocations, or is it simply unrealistic message for domestic consumption?
Well, we're always worried about provocations on the peninsula. It is clear that North Korea over decades has demonstrated that they see provocations lethal at times, non-lethal most of the time, kinetic, threatening. Overnight, we saw a barrage of artillery fire. Some of the details of it aren't quite clear, but this is the nature of the security situation on the peninsula and the type of diplomacy in which North Korea feels very comfortable. In that regard, the language, as we look at this kind of New Year's speech, joint editorial evolution now into a readout from a major party meeting, in this case, the 9th plenum of the 8th Party Congress, it tends to capture an environment and some principles. Some threats are embedded. It strategically warns, but in a tactical manner in terms of being able to have granularity on what the nature of the next action will be or what the timing might be. It's not particularly helpful or insightful other than reminding us of the sorry state of affairs we're in right now with Kim Jong-un, his refusal to engage in dialogue, and his willingness to rely on threats and intimidation in his outreach toward both Seoul and Washington.
North Korea has defined the relationship between the two Koreas as two hostile countries in a state of war, not a relationship between compatriots. Is this a change in strategy? After previously emphasizing of their slogan, among our nation, 우리 민족끼리, if they are not compatriots but hostile warring state, wouldn't this suggest that North Korea could use nuclear weapons against South Korea?
I would not say that this change in formulation itself is what now makes a nuclear use of nuclear weapons towards South Korea possible. I would say going back for many years, and I think those, maybe, and Bruce can speak for himself, but I think Bruce and we often complete each other's sentences. For years we have worried that the North Korean nuclear program was primarily targeted towards eventually establishing dominance over South Korea. There's two main parts to that, right? One is to be able to attempt to try to decouple the U.S. from its security commitments to the ROK by developing some type of ability to hit the U.S. mainland with nuclear weapons. There's that point, but it's also that you would have capabilities, and we've seen them demonstrated over the past few years in the shorter range ballistic missile category, that you would demonstrate you have weapons that could inflict nuclear level damage on targets, both what we call counter value and counter force. Counter value meaning infrastructure, civilians, maybe even indiscriminate use just for intimidation purposes, but also the counter force that you would use them selectively on South Korean military targets. So I don't see the evolution of this language itself as speaking to a growing potential for nuclear use, because I've always felt that has been there.
Mr. Klingner, what do you think? Many people have pointed out that North Korea's previous emphasis on compatriots was a deception. Can this be interpreted as an official confirmation that it was a deception all along?
I think when we look at North Korean statements, they're useful for signaling trends, but there's also, I think, a danger in overanalyzing. Some, even sort of look to the punctuation and see that North Korea used a comma instead of a semicolon, so that this is a signal of benign intent. And especially sort of the New Year's Day statements always lent themselves to analysis or overanalysis. So, over the years, we've seen North Korea's attitude towards South Korea ebb and flow, as well as toward the United States. And some years it'll be critical of the United States, but friendly to South Korea, or vice versa. Certainly this is a worrisome trend. We see the statements not only by Kim Jong-un, but Kim Yo-jong, of seemingly, stronger rhetoric, and clearly the growing nuclear and missile capabilities over the years and decades are also in and of themselves very worrisome. So, as we try to determine, will there be provocations this year? Well, of course, that's in the nature of the regime. It just depends how many and what kind. What we're most worried about, of course, is some kind of attack, or whether it's intentional or inadvertent. And I think as as forces move back to the DMZ with the Comprehensive Military Agreement being abrogated, that increases the risk for inadvertent clashes, at a tactical level, which can then escalate to strategic. And then North Korea's shelling of near the northern limit line, that can lead to a tit-for-tat response, where then you have, whether neither side intended it, it can actually sort of stumble into a conflict of different levels. So I think what we see is North Korea more firmly closing the door on dialogue with South Korea and the United States. That's not to say that they may not reopen it at a crack in the future, but clearly there doesn't seem to be any real interest in dialogue, certainly under the President Yoon's administration.
Okay, as you just mentioned, Kim Jong-un's threat to destroy if provoked is a familiar refrain from North Korea. But in the past, it has been seen as more of a bluff or exaggeration. However, given North Korea's growing nuclear and missile capabilities, is this threat becoming more realistic?
It's always becoming more realistic as they develop greater, not only nuclear, but also missile capabilities, as well as some improvements to their conventional forces. In the past, some would see North Korean statements as indicating that their nuclear forces were only a defensive deterrent, and they would point to the 2013 nuclear law. However, during the past decade, before they revised that law, there were any number of statements by North Korea that they would use nuclear weapons in a preemptive manner, if they perceived that the U.S. or South Korea was going to attack. They vowed to preempt a preemption. So as they get more and more nuclear weapons and more capable missiles, there's always that concern that they may misinterpret routine military exercises by the Allies as a precursor to an attack, and then therefore start an attack against an invasion which wasn't going to happen. So, as both sides, both Koreas as well as the U.S., lean further forward in their preemptive abilities and preemptive strategies, what I'm more concerned about is stumbling into a conflict rather than that North Korea is going to wake up someday and decide to take over the peninsula.
Yeah, I would say this may be one area where Bruce and I have a little bit of a difference of opinion, only in the sense that, North Korea has a history of military actions that when you look at them in retrospect, particularly like the Cheonan sinking and the Yeonpyeong-do shelling of 2010, where kind of the cost of their escalation is factored in. They factored in some type of ROK retaliation, but they've built in escalation control mechanisms because at the end of the day, what they don't want is war. They don't want something to spin out of control. And this has been kind of one of the major reasons why relative peace has been maintained for 70 years of armistice, is that the cost of going back to pick up the pieces from 1953, the cost is too high to North Korea. So we have a history of showing restraint, de-escalating after incidents, even firefights in the joint security area. And my concern is, and I don't think Bruce would absolutely, and you can speak to this if you want to, Bruce, rule out that worst case scenario. But what I really do try to focus my attention on is, do we see anything in North Korea's behavior that suggests a greater degree of boldness, that this time they can go beyond past kind of coercive actions into more revisionist actions? And so I worry a little bit more about, those types of bigger types of objective attacks than I do necessarily about uncontrolled escalation, accidental.
Yeah, no, I agree. And what I was referring to is sort of a strategic massive invasion. I don't think North Korea is planning on doing that. But as Sid correctly pointed out, they have been willing to do sort of tactical level attacks, that were very conscious decisions to do that. And also I'd add the 2015 landmine incident. So, and in that, it's North Korea is willing to cross the line into deadly attacks, and we've seen over the years, that happen, and that could in and of itself escalate to a strategic conflict. But we do have to be very concerned about a growing willingness for them to do things even at the tactical level. And in the last 2 years, we've seen very provocative military exercises by North Korea closer to the DMZ with a larger number of conventional forces, even firing missiles south of the maritime demarcation line. Any of that could have led to a South Korean response. And I think back to the landmine incident where South Korea, saw that North Korea had fired 13 artillery shells into South Korea. They responded with a 3-for-1 response of 39 artillery shells into North Korea. And then the UN command did a study and found out that there were no incoming North Korean artillery shells. An older counter-battery radar of South Korea had misinterpreted a lightning storm in the region as 13 incoming artillery shells. So in that case, North Korea might have responded to what they saw as an unprovoked South Korean attack. So, there's that danger of miscalculation, of error, but also, as Sid correctly pointed out, there is North Korean willingness to do attacks at a tactical level.
Mr. Klingner, North Korea mentioned the establishment of the Nuclear Consultative Group, regularized U.S. ROK Japan exercises, and the deployment of U.S. strategic assets such as strategic nuclear submarines and strategic bombers to the Korean Peninsula. Isn't it a sign that these measures are actually working? A sign that Kim Jong-un is very afraid of these extended deterrence measures?
Well, I'd see two aspects. The first is, North Korea always looks for things to complain about that the U.S. or its allies are doing as a way of justifying actions that they were likely going to do anyway. So, every time we do a military exercise, they often, issue an 8 or 9 page grumpygram where they list all the U.S. or South Korean forces that are being used, and this clearly shows our hostile intent, et cetera. On the other hand, what I'd say is all of those actions, were intended to affirm the U.S. assurance to our allies of our extended deterrence guarantee. We resumed military exercises during the past 2 years to restore allied deterrence and defense capabilities. We engaged with the Washington Declaration and the Nuclear Consultative Group and other measures to try to reassure our South Korean ally that we will be there during a major conflict with North Korea. So those were measures more on reassurance than on deterrence, I think. But certainly the measures were also intended to not only affirm our support to South Korea, but also to enhance our deterrence capability to ensure that North Korea saw that we would be there shoulder to shoulder with South Korea during a conflict if North Korea started one.
How credible is North Korea's claim that it fired artillery rounds in response to perceived military actions by South Korea?
We don't know what caused North Korea to do the firing of the artillery. But during the past 2 years, they've been more provocative in their military exercises. They've flown large numbers of aircraft closer to the DMZ. They fired artillery as well as missiles south of the northern limit line. So I haven't seen the North Korean statement as to what the catalyst for their action was, but we have seen, I think, more aggressive military exercises during the past 2 years. Now, as I said earlier, some would say that is in response to the resumption of military exercises by the U.S. and South Korea. But again, North Korea was doing those kind of actions, though perhaps not quite as provocatively during the 4 years that we weren't doing military exercises.
I agree with Bruce. We need a little bit more information on exactly what transpired, where the shells landed. I think they were calibrated to generate some type of response, force South Korea's hand into some type of responsive action. It wasn't lethal, like Yeonpyeong-do, where actual civilians were killed. And I think this would be the type of provocation that we would expect going forward, in particular, because it's going to generate a response immediately, a debate immediately about what caused North Korea to behave like this. Well, it's the hardline policy of the Yoon administration, or what was the appropriateness of the ROK response, which by some critics will be characterized, however much restraint is shown, as escalatory. And this is a type of dilemma that, what we call the South-South conflict in terms of the debate in South Korea over North Korea policy, as well as the U.S. ROK handling of it. So it's going to take us a little bit more time to figure out exactly what took place. That's about all we can safely say at this point.
Right. Mr. Seiler, North Korea has been highlighting the presence of Kim Jong-un's daughter, Kim Ju-ae, since the beginning of the new year. We saw some of gestures like Kim Jong-un kissing his daughter, Ju-ae, and Ju-ae touching Kim's cheek. I mean, there is a significant difference of opinion among Korean watchers in Washington and Seoul about the prominence of Kim Ju-ae. Do you think that Kim Ju-ae's presence alongside her father is a symbolically important event, and it has a similar purpose to the accompaniment of Kim Jong-il by Kim Il-sung and Kim Jong-un by Kim Jong-il? Is it really part of a long-term succession project?
Nobody knows with any degree of certainty. In fact, even in North Korea, there may not have been a decision made, but we do know for now, this is highly unusual that, Kim Ju-ae would be accompanying her father, being given the respected daughter title, and being, given, this prominent multimedia coverage. She's, in all these various events. So there is some importance here. And I think the conclusion, the assumption that this is related to succession, you can't but come to that conclusion. Now, am I 100% certain? No, but I would say, for one, those who would rule out a Kim Ju-ae succession because, somehow North Korea's system could not accommodate a female, I think they're wrong. I think the leading role in particular that Kim Yo-jong has played in being a voice for the regime and having a visible presence as well was designed to get the people accustomed to the possibility of women in more visible positions of power, which would extend to Kim Chiu-ae. So there's no reason to outright dismiss that possibility right now. At the end of the day, though, there's no real immediate policy relevance. The policy relevance would be if Kim was bringing his daughter everywhere because he was told by a doctor that he's got 6 to 12 months to live, and we might be dealing with a succession scenario. But short of that, the policy implications are very small in this regard. So the ambiguity over this doesn't really trouble me.
Kim Yo-jong, the sister of North Korean leader Kim Jong-un, has harshly criticized South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol's New Year's address. Saying it gave the justification and legitimacy to further accelerate our efforts to secure overwhelming nuclear power. Interestingly, she also mentioned the former South Korean President Moon Jae-in, saying sarcastically that he was a person who knows how to take care of real security. But she called Yoon a person who has firmly contributed to building our self-defense and justifiable, irresistible military power. North Korea once made the disparaging remarks about Moon, calling him a boiled head of a cow. So why is it suddenly comparing him to Yoon, describing him more favorably than Yoon?
Well, if I could digress a little bit at the beginning, when you mentioned Kim's sister, I remember a couple of years ago, everyone was talking about her being the successor to Kim Jong-un, and now we've shifted our focus to the daughter. So I'm still a bit skeptical about Ju-ae being the next successor, not because she's a woman, but the other times when we've had the succession, the new leader or the future leader was always depicted in this incredibly impressive manner. Not only the 13 holes in one on Kim Jong-il's first time playing golf, but just they're being presented as a brilliant military strategist and tactician, and that Kim Jong-un wowed the generals with his knowledge of artillery, etc. So I would have expected more of a presentation of this awe-inspiring next generation, perhaps the older brother of Ju-ae that may or may not exist, but really, I think, as Sid would agree, is at this point, it doesn't matter. We have to deal with the leader who's in front of the curtain rather than worrying about which one is behind the curtain is going to play first chair violin. And also, there's no indication that any next leader is going to pursue policies any different from the three previous leaders. So, you deal with the North Korean leader you're facing today, and you deal with the policies, and there's no indication the policies will be any different. Now, in turning to how North Korea is responding to President Yoon, they prefer progressive presidents. They get more concessions from progressive presidents. But now when they're being very polite towards Moon, perhaps as a way of influencing the National Assembly elections, but as you point out, they were very critical of Moon during his era. They blew up the Inter-Korean Liaison Office. They rejected dialogue with President Moon, and they were quite insulting to him at the time. So I think it's perhaps looking back with rose-colored glasses at the Moon administration, saying they liked him better than Yoon, which I think they did. President Moon implemented the anti-balloon leaflet law and other concessions to North Korea. So. I think whether they want to influence the assembly elections or not, it's certainly they're going to be more critical of a South Korean president who stands up to Pyongyang than one who is more accommodating.
Well, that's all the time we have for this week. Mr. Seiler and Mr. Klingner, thank you very much for your time today.
Well, thank you for having us.
Thank you, Chia. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for watching. We'll be back next week to discuss the two Koreas and the region here from Washington.